I would like to help you improve your bar exam essays. In 2020, I wrote a selected answer for the FYLSE, and then in 2023, I wrote another selected answer for the California bar exam. In this video, I'm going to show you how I wrote selected answer A for question 1 on the November 2020 FYLSE exam. With a bit of practice, I am sure that you can do the same. The question that we're going to be looking at is question number 1 from the November 2020 FYLSE. Specifically, selected answer A would be the answer that I'm going to try to recreate, which is what I wrote when I took the FYLSE a few years ago. You can get a copy of the exam by going to the past exams website from the State Bar of California. Scroll down, here it is, and then you are going to want to look at question number 1, which is the one sitting right here, and then here's the answer that I wrote. I've already downloaded the question so we can mark it up. So let's start out by creating a quick outline. I tend to, whenever it's a simple fact pattern like this, typically what I tend to do is read it while I identify very low-hanging fruit. Then I will go through, and that is issues that I can identify immediately without getting in the way of comprehension. Then after that, I will go through and I will do a more thorough read where I'm then looking for those intricate issues. This fact pattern right here is fairly straightforward, so I don't think it's going to take many times of trying to decipher what's going on. So the first thing that we want to do is read the call. So basically, with what crimes could Dave be reasonably charged? Be the first one, and then we're asked the same thing about Bob. So we'll start out with State v. Dave, and then State v. Bob will be kind of our two headings. And let's go ahead and start, or at least reading through and then identifying kind of low-hanging fruit. Dave and Ed were partners in D&E Delicious Donuts. Ed was the baker in the back of the store, and Dave waited on customers in the front. Dave would routinely enter less than the actual amount paid by customers into the cash register, and he would keep the difference. So here we have Dave basically siphoning money that really should be going to the partnership. And even though he's a partner, right, even though he is kind of partial owner, if you want to look at it that way, still the money should be going to the entity. It shouldn't be going to his pocket, right? And he's pocketing the difference. So that's going to be embezzlement, right? And we'll get into, the exact rules here in a minute, but right now we're just trying to identify issues that we can identify very quickly. So definitely embezzlement, right? Not larceny, because he's a higher level worker, right? He's a partner. He's not just a worker, right? So that's why it wouldn't be larceny at that point. Okay, next. Dave noticed every Friday morning at 9 a.m. Jane would go to the bank across the street, withdraw some funds, then come back to D&E. Every time Jane came to the store, she would walk up to the counter to order a donut and a cup of coffee, to talk to Dave for a few moments, and then sit at the table. From his conversations with Jane, Dave knew that she withdrew $250 on Friday mornings to cover her personal expenses for the following week. So this one, not a whole lot of things seem to happen, but there is one thing that should stick out to us. Without this conversation here, Dave wouldn't know that routinely she has $250 with her. So we're going to bank that information. That's not an issue I'm going to identify here right now, but that is something definitely to keep track of later, because it could be used to establish Dave's intent, right? If he was going to steal from her, which is basically what's going to happen soon. Okay, next. On Thursday, Dave suggested to Bob, so we see Dave suggesting something to Bob, a regular customer, that when Jane came into the store on Friday, he would grab her purse and run away. So here we have Dave suggesting to Bob that Bob do something illegal, and specifically, right, for him to commit a crime, and specifically that crime being larceny, to take her purse on Friday, which he would know that on Friday there's $250 in it, right? So with that said, because he's asking, that's going to be solicitation, right? Solicitation. Again, we'll fill out the rules here in a little bit, right? Next, Dave said that they could split the money later, so that establishes a little bit more of, his intent to keep the money, right? Bob said that he would think about it. This right here, I'm going to mark in a different color. Basically, what this is trying to do right here, or at least what the test writers are doing from my perspective, is they're trying to muddy up whether or not a conspiracy actually occurred. Because, in a conspiracy, people are agreeing to do something, and Bob didn't say, let's go do that immediately. He said, let me think about it. So was there really a conspiracy? That's what they're trying to get you to decipher, right? Well, it turns out that you can have you can enter into a conspiracy multiple ways. You can do it by agreement, right? I can just tell you, hey, let's go do this illegal thing. But I can also act, right? I can also enter into a conspiracy by conduct. So if later on Bob was to act on that solicitation, then we would have a conspiracy. And in the next paragraph, that's exactly what we're going to have, right? So let's go and continue. The next day, Jane came to D&E as usual, ordered a donut and a cup of coffee, and set her purse on the table. Bob walked past her table, took Jane's purse, and ran towards the door. So this single line right here actually does two things. Number one, it establishes that Bob committed larceny, right? And again, we're just identifying issues, so larceny, right? And at the same time, Bob acted in accordance to the agreement that he had with Dave, which was to steal, that is to commit the larceny. So in that right there, that would establish a conspiracy for both, right? And a conspiracy, we're going to have to be careful on that one, at least in terms of within this fact pattern. Conspiracy will be one of the two larger issues. Just because we have common law, then we also have modern. We also have the Pinkerton rules. So we have a few different things that can muddy that up a little bit. But certainly, we want to identify that they're starting to conspire, right? Okay, next up, another customer, Phil, saw what was happening and tried to block the door, but Bob knocked Phil over, right? So when we do that, we are going to have a battery with Phil, right? So Phil saw what's happening, but Bob knocked Phil over and ran outside while Bob was running down the street and looking back to see if anybody was following him, right? He collided with Arlene. Notice here, he was looking back, right, when he ran into her, so it was an accident. But still collided with her, and she hit the sidewalk and she died. So two things we'll need to consider. Is there a battery as far as Arlene is concerned, right? And the next thing that we need to look at will be the death. So we have some sort of homicide here, so we're going to have to analyze this for murder, as well as manslaughter, right? Now, we could put just manslaughter here and then break it down into involuntary and involuntary. But right away, we know at this point, there really was not any... It was an accident that he hit her, right? That he ran into her and then she fell, right? So there's nothing voluntary here. It wasn't like a heat of the moment, crime of passion kind of thing. Mostly it would be, if it was that, it would be some sort of involuntary manslaughter. Okay, so that's our first read, and if we leave it at that, we're going to miss a whole lot of points, right? And the reason for that is there's something else going on here, right? Remember that you can be vicariously liable as conspirators, but you can also be vicariously liable if you assist, help others, right? So that's something that we'll have to deal with, and that is there's going to be some sort of accomplice liability here, right? Why is there accomplice liability? Well, if you look at this, right, Dave is helping Bob, right? And so in order to have accomplice liability, you need to encourage, help, assist, etc., right? So Dave is assisting with this theft, right? He identified that there was going to be money in the purse on what particular day, gave instructions. I mean, that is part of the solicitation, but it's also lending help to that actually occurring. So there will be accomplice liability, right? Likewise, Bob is also helping Dave, right? He's actually committing the crime. He's helping. So Dave came up with a plan, but then Bob went through and he actually executed the plan. So he's helping that crime occur, the larceny of her purse, right? So in this particular case, we also have accomplice liability here, right? Another thing that we should notice at this point on our second read is we have this, as soon as we have accomplice liability, it's going to make Dave liable for anything that Bob does and in furtherance, of that crime that they're doing together, right? And then we're also going to have Bob liable for anything that Dave does, right? Well, because of that, we're going to have certain crimes are going to merge with each other, right? So, for example, the solicitation of the larceny of the purse, when all of a sudden his crime becomes that there has been a larceny, that is also going to merge, right? So what we're going to do in here, so solicitation merges with the completed crime, not conspiracy though. So we need to prove that we know that, right? Merger. And then finally, we'll just point out that Dave is going to be liable for all of the crimes of Bob as an accomplice and as a conspirator. We could have stated that in here, but we might as well just kind of headstone it out there and have it by itself again. So vicarious liability. Down here, when we have murder or manslaughter, murder, we're going to break down. Normally, we need to look at whether or not there's malice, whether or not it's been a killing of a person, etc., etc., etc. So when it comes to murder, typically the way that I break it down is, I look at, has there been a homicide, actual cause, proximate cause. Proximate cause typically in murder is not at issue, but it's something that at least I throw in there, even if it's not, right? Malice, that will be where we're going to spend most of the, at least in terms of writing, quite a bit. And then we'll evaluate, all of the components of malice. Then after that, then we can determine whether or not there has been a common law murder. And then we'll evaluate involuntary manslaughter. Okay, so that's basically our outline, right? So at this point, we are ready to start writing. And again, on this particular fact pattern, I would say it's a lot of just tagging things as opposed to a whole lot of complicated bringing in multiple issues together. So I think that will speed things up for us quite a bit. Also, the answer that we're going to go over, even though it's a selected answer, it is not a model answer. In fact, as I read it, it's been a while since I did the FYLSE. As I read it, I realize, this could have been argued better. That could have been. There's places where it can definitely be improved. I believe this got. Well, I know it got an 85. So with that said, let's actually look at what my model answer was, right? Or not model answer, what my selected answer was, and go from there. So I'm going to go ahead and make this a little bit smaller so it's easier to see for you guys. And let's go over what my selected answer was, and we'll go through it, kind of matching stuff up from one side to the other. I'm going to go ahead and highlight everything and then unhighlight it. That way it's easier to match up what goes with that. Okay, embezzlement is so we start out with our outline. Embezzlement is the unlawful conversion of property of another by one who's in lawful possession of it. And this right here is coming from here, right? So he would routinely enter less than what was given for him by customers who gave him the money. So in this particular case, that money that is being given to him, he has lawful possession of it, right? And then we basically just mark stuff up. When Dave took the money from the customers and entered less than the actual amount, he took property that belonged to D&E, right? So it belonged to the partnership, and he exercised dominion and control over the money, which is unlawful conversion. Notice that what we do here is we state what occurred. There are many ways of doing this. However, this right here is pretty formulaic and pretty straightforward. What we do is we say, what were the facts? So when he took this money, what did it mean in terms of how does it satisfy a legal component of our rule? So when Dave took the money, he took unlawful conversion, which is one of the elements of embezzlement, right? Because he did so volitionally and without informing his partner. That is, he didn't say, hey, I'm going to take this, right? So he's kind of doing it sneakily. This demonstrates a specific intent to deprive D&E of the funds. That's all you gotta say. Then, if we really wanted to, at this point, we could have immediately gone to he's guilty of embezzlement. But we want to also show that we know when embezzlement applies within the context of an organization where somebody said low-level employee versus high-level employee, right? So next we follow it up with, because Dave is a partner, that is a high-level employee, he is deemed to have possession of the money rather than custody, and Dave is guilty of embezzlement. At this point, boom, we are done with that. We don't have to come back to that again. Next, we hit solicitation, which was the next thing that we had on our list. Down here, Dave suggested to Bob, right? So solicitation is asking someone to commit a crime with a specific intent they committed, right? So in this particular case, well, I guess we'll just read it and discuss it, right? When Dave suggested to Bob that when Jane came into the store, he could grab her purse and run away, that he'd take the purse and run away, Dave asked Bob to commit a crime, that is larceny, with the intent that Bob complete the larceny. Dave has committed solicitation. So here we basically establish that he's asking him to do something illegal, and number two, that he has the specific intent for that to occur. And that's enough to establish this. I'm going to come back later after we discuss the entire essay. But right now I just want to hold it as it was when I wrote it, at the FYLSE. But this is one place where we could improve upon things. We'll come back to that later. Next, we go to conspiracy, and here conspiracy, we spent a little bit more. So here we have these very short rules. Here, we're going to spend more on the rule because we need to talk about common law conspiracy, where you just need an agreement and nothing else. We also need to talk about modernly, you need to have some sort of step in furtherance of the conspiracy typically. And then we also need to talk about the Pinkerton rule, which basically makes all parties liable for the actions of any one party in furtherance of that conspiracy. Pinkerton, we could have moved out to be its own thing, but I decided that it was fine to just kind of lump it all together and then go through and talk about how what we have here evaluates under each of those rules. So let's go through that real quick. Conspiracy is an agreement between two or more people to specifically engage in a crime or to do a legal action in a criminal manner. Under the common law, so first we have the first kind of branch, conspiracy requires only an agreement. Under the modern law, most states require an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy by one of the co-conspirators. Okay? Under the Pinkerton rule, each co-conspirator is chargeable for all crimes committed by the members of the conspiracy that are foreseeable and in furtherance of the conspiracy. So now that we have all of the elements of what is going to be required to prove a conspiracy, now we just connect the facts to that, right? When Bob walked up to Jane's table, took Jane's purse, and ran towards the door, he did perform an overt act in furtherance of the crime, that is, the larceny of the purse, in agreement with Dave's request that they steal the purse. The act of snatching the purse establishes a specific intent to deprive Jane of the purse because a reasonable person would not snatch a purse if he did not intend to steal it. So we need to establish that there was an agreement to take it, and then there was an agreement to just deprive her of that, right? So we need to establish both of those things. Bob's act. Now here is where we deal with this. Remember the thing that I marked in red sitting over here? Bob said that he would think about it. We deal with that here. Bob's act, while not verbal, satisfies entering into an agreement because an agreement can be entered by conduct. Notice that I could have added up here a rule that said one can enter a conspiracy by verbally, by agreement, or by conduct. I decided not to do that and just have it directly in the analysis, and that's perfectly okay. In fact, I think that reads better as opposed to having these huge long rules which just with no connection. Here, you're brought the rule just as it was needed to establish that. Bob's act of stealing the purse thus completes the conspiracy between Dave and Bob. And next, we conclude. So, Dave will be liable for conspiracy under common law and also modern law. And we're done. So not tremendously complicated, but definitely a little bit more complicated than the previous ones where it was just, embezzlement, you need these elements. He took something that was he had legally right to, but if he wasn't meant to have it and he kept it, that's all you had to do. You just had to find that inside of the fact pattern, right? Solicitation, you basically were just looking for, hey, did he ask somebody to do something illegal, and there was also a specific intent that occurred. Okay. Because conspiracy, however, became a little bit more complicated because you have to think, okay, so under the common law, you can have this. Under the modern law, you can have something else. So you have to keep both of those in mind at the same time. Then you also have the Pinkerton rule in there, which then basically makes people liable for the actions of other co-conspirators. So that's also kind of a thing to keep track of. But then I think what makes here a little bit more of a having to keep track of stuff kind of mentally was this thing right here, realizing that he entered the conspiracy by conduct. And how were you going to... You had to do two things. Number one, you realize that he entered the conspiracy by conduct. But number two, and a whole different thing, right? Is how do you communicate that within your write-up? You have to think of that too, right? One option was to put it all inside of the rules. That is, we could have said somebody can enter a conspiracy by conduct or in writing or verbally or by communication, or it could also be done by conduct. You could have had that in the rules and then talked about it down here. Or you could have just done it right, what I consider to be in text. Either way is fine, but you have to make sure that it reads that way. It's also very helpful to have these kind of small paragraphs where you might have the rule, but then you have little tiny paragraphs for each element. Okay, so once we have that, we're good to go. Next, we talk about accomplice. And here, I think I could have done a better job, but it still became a selected answer just because, here, we'll look at it here in a second. Okay, so next thing, we talk about accomplice liability. What is an accomplice? Assisting, encouraging, or helping the completion of a crime with a specific intent to be completed. Here, when Bob took the purse, he assisted Dave to complete the crime of larceny of the purse. So if you read this, it's nice that's there, but when you think about it, here basically what I'm saying is Bob is assisting Dave, but if you look at this section, we're looking at crimes of Dave. It's fine. It's kind of extra information, right? But really, it could have been further down, right? It's kind of like the backwards. It's like I'm looking for what did Dave do wrong, and here I'm starting with here's what Bob did wrong by helping Dave. So it's kind of backwards. But then in the next line, I clean it up, right? Thus, the purse was taken by Bob under the encouragement of Dave. Boom. That's what does it. Without that, we have an issue, or we have a problem, right? It's the encouragement of Dave, right? Encouraging, right? Thus, Dave is an accomplice to Bob on larceny. So this one up here is kind of not right. I mean, it's fine, but really here's the one that matters, right? When Dave encouraged Bob. What's the effect of that? Dave is an accomplice, and as a result, he will be liable for all crimes by Bob in connection with the larceny. And then I also, to save time, when I was going through this test, I was doing it chunk by chunk by chunk. I didn't know what was coming. I guess I should have, but sometimes I have a hard time kind of judging how much time I need. So I immediately also reversed it. I said, Dave is an accomplice, and Dave is an accomplice, and as a result would be liable for all crimes committed by Bob in connection with the larceny. And then in the next line is something that actually belongs in the next section, which is Bob will be deemed to be an accomplice of Dave too. So here established that they're both accomplices of each other, right? And it's fine to do that, but just make sure, even if you do that, that doesn't excuse not having an accomplice section down here. Luckily what I did was, since it was already discussed up there, I just said Supra, so I didn't have to rediscuss it again. But certainly has to be included down here, otherwise you have an issue as far as that's concerned. Okay, next we have a merger, and here basically they want to see that basically that conspiracy does not merge, right? Solicitation does, right? So if I solicit you to commit a murder, and then you commit the murder, we don't charge you for solicitation of murder and the murder, we just charge you only for murder. So here we just do that, merger. Lesser included crimes will merge into major crimes. Conspiracy will not merge into the completed crime. The solicitation charge will merge into the completed larceny. And now you might be asking, well, Carlos, you haven't made him liable of larceny. You have embezzlement, solicitation, conspiracy, accomplice liability, murder. But you're saying that you're going to merge this solicitation that you have up here with the larceny. The reason you can do that is because of this up here, the accomplice liability and also the conspiracy, which made Dave liable for the crimes of Bob, right? Dave is an accomplice, and he will be liable for all crimes committed by Bob. Well, Bob committed larceny. That's why it works, okay? Next, just to make it clear, we want to make it very, very clear to the reader that we know that vicarious liability can come. You have conspirator liability, but then you also have vicarious liability that comes from being an accomplice. We could have left it like this, but I also called out vicarious liability. Dave will be vicariously liable as an accomplice and also as a co-conspirator for the crimes of Bob. Boom. With that, now we are done with everything that had to do with Bob, and in fact, basically everything to us up here has now been discussed. With the exception of kind of the conspiracy, which will come back. That's kind of an overlap of the two. Everything down here has to do with Bob, right? So let's go ahead and get to it. So with larceny, we start out with our rule. The trespasser is taking and carrying away of personal property of another with intent to steal. Some people like to number the elements. You can do that. I tended to do that more in law school than when I took the FYLSE. That's really, however you want to do that. However, you want to make sure that within here, now you actually pull out every single element, right? So when Bob took the purse, and then we just say, here, what element is that? Property of another, and ran out the door. Well, that's taking and carrying away. He took the purse without permission and with the intent to permanently deprive Jane of the purse. Okay, we could have just said that, but the problem is, how do you know that he wanted to permanently deprive her of it? I mean, he ran over there, he grabbed it. What if he wanted to play, I don't know, football with it, whatever, right? So then we also have to establish that he wanted to permanently deprive her, right? Because a reasonable person would not match a purse from a stranger and run away if it was not the intent to permanently deprive her of the purse. I think that worked well here, or at least with what I knew at the time when I wrote the selected answer. Today I would argue this a little bit differently. I would add more meat to it. In fact, we'll do that once we get done and I've gone through everything that I did on the exam. I'll go back and I'll show you kind of how to improve it. So, we can make it higher than an 85. Next, we could have talked about robbery as a separate issue. I didn't. Instead, I just discounted it with a single line. Because there was no force or threat of force, the crime is not robbery. Thus, Bob is guilty of larceny. You did need to do this. It was important that we showed the reader that we could differentiate between robbery and larceny. And we could have done it any number of ways. Here, we basically told the reader, we know exactly what robbery is. It doesn't even apply here. It's just kind of a footnote, and that's perfectly okay. Next. For Phil, we had the first battery, right? Remember, Phil got in the way, right? Phil saw what was happening, tried to block the door, but Bob knocked over Phil and ran outside. So next we have this. Unwanted application of force resulting in harmful or offensive contact. Make sure that you do not get tort battery confused with criminal battery, right? Okay, when Bob knocked Phil down, when Bob knocked down Phil, who saw what was happening, he was trying to stop him. Bob applied force to Phil that was a minimum offensive because Bob knocked down Phil. Kind of redundant, but still establishes that we found those facts in the fact pattern, right? I mean, if you went to somebody and you just whacked them, right, and as you ran them over kind of thing, that would be offensive. There's not really much argument there. Next, we have Arlene. Here, we could have said Supra for the rule, but since it was in the computer, I could just copy-paste, right? Unlawful application of force resulting in harmful offensive contact. Next, now we just find those facts. When Bob knocked down Arlene on the sidewalk, it was an unlawful application of force and thus a battery. The battery, however, will merge with the homicidal charge because it is a lesser included crime. Notice, if you remember from criminal law, right, versus, let's say, tort law, right, battery is a general intent crime, right, as opposed to a tortious intentional tort, right, when it comes. So make sure you have those two down, right? So they're testing a little bit of that here. Also a little bit of whether or not you know that the battery is going to merge with the homicidal charge. So you have that down. You'd be perfectly good to go. If I was going to predict one place where people would likely messed up on this test, it would have been the conspiracy. That's a little bit more analysis. And here's just a little bit of confusion. If you use tortious battery, I thought, well, there was no intent. He was looking back when he ran her over. Versus a general intent crime, there wouldn't have to be the intent there. There would just have to be, and it's not just him. He could just be careless when he did it, right? And that would work. Okay, next, let's go ahead and go over to murder, right? Now, when I said, when I was in law school and I used to do more of a murder is, the killing, homicide committed with malice, forethought, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Here, I kind of broke it down more. I think I was a bit formulaic when I wrote this. And I could create like all types of scenarios where, there was no proximate cause or actual cause, etc. Right? The big important thing here will be the malice discussion, but we'll still go through it. Okay, so murder, we define it. Murder is a homicide committed with malice aforethought. Okay, we have that down. Then it could be a killing of a person. So we go over that, right? Killing of a human being by another human being. Here, Arlene is a human and has died. Therefore, a homicide has occurred. Actual cause, but for Arlene getting knocked on the ground and getting hit on the head, she would not have died. So we have actual cause established. No big deal. Proximate cause, natural unforeseeable consequence. It is foreseeable that getting knocked on the ground and hit in one head on the sidewalk would result in death. So proximate cause is established. Okay, that makes sense. And now here, we just do our standard malice analysis, right? Let's just go through it, right? Malice is established when the defendant kills with an intent to kill, intent to inflict serious bodily harm with a depraved heart, or in the commission of an inherently dangerous felony, that is felony murder rule. Next, we let the reader know that felony murder requires a statute, and in most jurisdictions, it requires an enumerated inherently dangerous felony or a felony committed in an inherently dangerous manner. Notice that to save time, I didn't list, BARC. I didn't list all of those inherently dangerous felonies. Was not necessary here. Now what we're going to do is, in our analysis, we're going to go through each of these. We're going to go towards, is malice established with an intent to kill, etc., intent to inflict serious bodily harm, etc. Here, Bob did not intentionally run into Arlene. It says it very clearly, right? When he was looking back to see if anybody was behind him. So he did not intend to kill her. He also did not intend to inflict serious bodily harm. So that's what we do next. Bob did not intentionally run into Arlene. That's almost copy and paste for there. Thus, there will not be an intent to kill / serious bodily harm. So at that point, we've basically discounted both of these. Running down the street is not likely to satisfy running down the street is not likely to satisfy after committing a larceny is not likely to be considered a depraved heart. A little bit of a typo here in terms of speed, right? You're writing this kind of on the test and you're kind of under time pressure. But basically we established that just running down the street after stealing a purse, that's not a depraved heart, right? That's not like sitting on over like an overpass where people are driving by and you throw bricks down and they're not really caring whether or not people crash and die, right? Here, the guy was just trying to run away, so it's just kind of a weird accident. So there is no depraved heart here. A larceny is not considered one of the inherently dangerous felonies required for the felony murder, so that allows us to immediately discount this rule, and therefore there's not going to be malice. And now we just deal with your common law murder, right? With no malice established, there can be no murder. Done. Right? So this right here is kind of, it relies on this analysis sitting here. We still have a death, so we still have to analyze this, and we failed kind of our murder analysis. There's nothing in there. So now what we need to do is we analyze it under manslaughter. And as we mentioned before, this was an accident. There was no, it wasn't imperfect self-defense, so it wouldn't be voluntary manslaughter that way. It also wasn't a passion, a heated argument. I caught my lover in bed kind of thing, so it wouldn't be voluntary manslaughter for that either. So it's going to be involuntary manslaughter is what we evaluate under. So with that said, we say a homicide committed without malice and forethought as a result of criminal negligence or engaging in a malum in, say, misdemeanor or non-dangerous felony, right? And now we just analyze under that. Here, Bob's larceny will serve as the non-dangerous felony for an involuntary manslaughter charge, which that works. And Bob will be guilty of involuntary manslaughter. That's all it takes. Conspiracy, we've already discussed at length, so we can just do conspiracy supra. Accomplice, we've already discussed up here. When we did our accomplice liability here, we talked about how Bob will be to be deemed an accomplice of Dave too. So here we kind of did a bi-directional accomplice analysis, so we can just bring that in. And then finally, our vicarious liability, I guess we could have been done Supra as well here. Just as Dave is vicariously liable for the crimes of Bob, Bob is vicariously liable for the crimes of Dave. And that is it. That is what it took to do well on this exam. Like I said, it was a selected answer. For that particular exam, I think I know the grade was an 85. Now that since doing that, I've also, graduated law school. Then I also took the general, the regular bar exam, also did a selected answer there. Now looking at this with those eyes, right, many years later, there's some places where this could be improved upon. Namely, we really didn't use the information here. Nowhere in here did I talk about the fact that Dave knew that she had $250 on her. And they spent time establishing that. They established that every Friday at 9 a.m. she came in and she had $250, and that Dave talked to Bob on Thursday. Just on the exam, it just never occurred to me to use that information. So let's briefly talk about how we could do that to, even get a higher grade, right? Really what that comes to what that establishes, the places that we could use it is Dave's state of mind. Dave knew that she would have $250 on her. And then any place where establishing that Dave's intent to deprive her of that, the $250, we could now use that information, and we never did that. So let's go through and find out where that would help, right? Embezzlement, really, it wouldn't really work there at all. When he solicits, here we could have added that, right? He could say, hey, he suggested that when she comes to the store, they could grab her money and run away, grab her money. And then here we could say, he also suggested that they could split the money later. So let me go ahead and mark in red. So that they could split the money later. So that establishes even further, you're not just grabbing her purse and running outside, or hiding it, or destroying it, or anything. I want you to get her purse and steal it so we can then split the money. That should have been here. That would have raised the score. Next, the conspiracy, I think, is fine here. When they're agreeing, as far as agreeing to take the money from her, here we could have also used the fact that knowing that on Friday morning she would have the money on her, right? And that the conspiracy, the conversation for the conspiracy took place on Thursday, the day before. We could also use that to strengthen our conspiracy argument. We could say, the reasonable conclusion here is that if we're meeting today and I'm asking you to do, I meet with you today, Thursday, and tell you go ahead and steal Jane's money tomorrow, and I know that when she's here tomorrow, she's going to have $250 on her because she has that every single Friday. That's a much stronger argument than what I did here. What I did here I think was good enough. Still got a selected answer, but that was not included. Accomplice, I think we did well there. Murder, we did there. Larceny, we did well. Battery, I think we did okay. Other than that, I think the rest of it got everything that needed to be gotten. Anyhow, hopefully that helps those of you who are facing this exam. So whether or not you guys have questions about the FYLSE or the general bar exam, please feel free to reach out. I've gotten selected answers on both of those exams. Have a wonderful day.